Okay, so again, what we're going to do is your reporter will tell us in a nutshell what happened in your case. And then you tell us the principles violated. Just give us the numbers. And then the last thing is what you will do as the Education Practices Commission. Okay? Inappropriate. A picture is what? Excuse me. Group 1. A picture is what? Who's your reporter? Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Okay, so in this case, a 32-year-old teacher discovered pornographic pictures from the school computer, and then he brought that computer home, and he downloaded them into a bunch of files, brought it back to school, and showed the pictures to the boys in the classroom. Then he started refraining from teaching lessons, and he showed more and more pictures. Then a parent overheard a child in the class complaining that they didn't learn anything. In the class, all they did was look at dirty pictures. So then they went to the principal. The principal went to the classroom after hours after the teacher was gone and went to the computer. He had a technology expert look at the computer. They found the files. They called the police, and then the police took the computer and the disk. The principal met the teacher the next day, sent him home. He was arrested. The teacher resigned. He was placed on 3 years probation. He needed psychological evaluation, received counseling, and he had a $256 fine and 100 hours of community service. We said that the principles that were violated were 3A, 3B, 3E, 3F, and 4C, and we thought permanent revocation would be necessary in this situation.
Okay, fantastic. This is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to show you how the real Education Practices Commission ruled in your case. Okay? Let's see what the Education Practices Commission did in this case. Okay. Permanent revocation. Guys? Okay. Inappropriate language.
So basically, the teacher, Mark Madison, he was a guidance counselor, taught elementary school. He had been working with the school district school board for 20 years, and during the last 2 years of his last two school years, he had been making inappropriate sexual comments to students, using offensive slang words. He shared stories with his students about his own personal sex life. He berated female students for alleged sexual promiscuity, accused them of contracting sexually transmitted diseases, and also spoke about appearance in inappropriate sexual terms. The principles that we thought he violated were
3A, E, and G. And then we talked about a 5-year revocation under 101295, offering recovery under 1012.798 for a mental condition. And then what did we say about 5 years?
It's probation.
Probation for 5 years after.
Okay, let's see what happened in this case. Okay. It's close enough. It's very close, you know. The Education Practices Commission revoked his certificate for a 6-year period. Okay? And then, as you said, they you guys established a 5-year probation, they established a 2-year probation. You guys also asked that he participated in the Recovery Network program. They did also. They also require him to go take some courses at the college level or as part of in-service training on 2 different things: classroom management and appropriate language to students. Okay? So you guys did very well. Very good. Okay, Kiss and Tell, the last group.
Okay.
Navar, I think is his name. Navar, anybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Mr. Navar.
Mr. Navarre.
He basically took a special interest in a student that wasn't in his class. That was a 16-year-old male. His parents separated, and his mother left, and his father told the boy not to come home for a while. So he basically preyed on this student and saw that he was vulnerable and gave him a place to stay in his classroom, and then started hanging out with him, started bringing him to his house, and started giving him money for sexual favors. And the sexual favors gave him money to repair his car. Sexual favors got too much, and the student told the counselor. And then and then his family started threatening. Navarre's family, the teacher's family, started threatening for talking to the police. And basically, after all this, the counselor reported it to the assistant principal, and the teacher wrote the child a love letter, and the student took the love letter to the counselor, and that's when he told the assistant principal.
Okay.
And that's
So
what happened.
what principles will you guys
Oh, he was living
identify?
in his classroom. The student was living in his classroom also.
Okay. Okay,
So-
tell us the principles that were violated.
A lot.
Okay.
3A, B, H, E, F, 4E, 4C, 5G, 5C, 5A.
Okay, very good. So what will you guys do as the Education Practices Commission?
Yeah.
What now?
Permanent revocation.
Permanent revocation?
Put him on an island
Is
somewhere.
everybody sure it's permanent revocation?
Yes.
Let's see what the Education Practices Commission did in this case. Okay. So Mr. Navarre decided to surrender his certificate. And anytime you surrender your certificate, it's for permanent revocation. So you guys did great. Now we can clap, yeah. Very good, very good. You guys did very well. Okay. Just bear with me. Okay, what I want to do at this point is to quickly talk about the investigative process. Yes.
I just had a quick question. Is there any benefit to a teacher to surrender their certificate versus having it taken away?
There's no benefit.
No benefit, okay.
And we're going to talk about it right now. Yeah. Because you surrender your certificate, it's going to be for permanent revocation. So there is no benefit. Okay. So what happens here is that when anyone reports an educator to the Department of Education, it goes to the Professional Practices Services. Okay? The Professional Practices Services, will determine jurisdiction, and we've talked about that. Jurisdiction simply means the educator either holds a state certificate or has applied for a state certificate. Okay? And then they have to determine legal sufficiency. Has the educator violated either State Board of Education rule or a section in Florida law? And once they've been able to determine that, then they go ahead and conduct an investigation. After they've conducted their investigation, then they put together a report, okay? That they work in, they work with also the general counsel for the Department of Education and the different attorneys in the Department of Education. And then they make a recommendation to the Commissioner of Education whether there should be probable cause or no probable cause, okay? If you look on page 32, 33, they depicted the investigative process on two different charts, okay? Now, it is that Commissioner of Education that is still going to make his or her own determination. So if the Commissioner decides there is no probable cause, that means there's nothing really here for the state to do anything with, taking action against an educator's certificate. So if the Commissioner of Education rules no probable cause, the case is closed and the case becomes public information, okay? Now, if the Commissioner of Education rules that there is probable cause, okay, the case is moved on to the Education Practices Commission. Hear me out. If the Commissioner of Education rules probable cause, the case is moved to the Education Practices Commission, EPC. You've got to understand that, okay? And so what happens is that the EPC will put together a formal complaint that goes to the educator and also to the superintendent. And the educator has 20 days to respond to the complaint. And so right here, the educator has several election of rights that they have to pick from. And so the educator can, if they want to, surrender their certificate. The only thing in that is that if they surrender their certificate, it's going to be for permanent revocation. Okay? Or the educator may pick formal hearing. Formal hearing, I am contesting the allegation. The Department of Education has said I have done ABCD, and I'm saying no, I haven't done it. And so what happens in a case where the educator is selecting formal hearing? The Education Practices Commission will hire an administrative law judge. These are usually judges who have retired, but they're just working here and there. And so the primary responsibility of the administrative law judge is to determine the facts of that case. Because we don't know what the facts of the case are. The DOE is alleging one thing, and the educator is saying, I did not do it. So the administrative law judge will determine the facts of that case. If the administrative law judge finds out that the educator is actually guilty of what has been charged of him, then the administrative law judge will also come up with recommendations for how that educator can be punished. And all of that will go back to the Education Practices Commission. And the Education Practices Commission will take all of that into consideration in their final order. Okay? And so the educator can also pick informal hearing. Informal hearing usually means, they come before the 25 commission members, and the educator basically is asking for leniency. And given reason. I said, when this thing was going on in my life, a lot of things were happening. I was not myself. I'm a very good educator. Look at my records. This is not me. Please have mercy. And so basically asking for leniency. Okay? Settlement agreement could go on between the educator's lawyer and the Department of Education attorneys. And so if the Department of Education attorneys and the educator's lawyer can come up with a settlement agreement, then it will be forwarded to the Education Practices Commission for final approval. Okay? Now, if an educator does not respond within 20 days, on the 21st day, if the Education Practices Commission does not hear from you, then you have defaulted. And so, depending on the egregiousness of the situation, the Department of Education may decide to permanently revoke, if an educator defaults, okay? So that is what the investigative process looks like, okay? Now, we've talked about the standard of proof, right? The administrative, clear, and convincing evidence. Is that correct? Okay, very good. We've talked about the NITS process, right?
Yep.
Have we talked about the NITS process or not?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. What I want to talk about right now is the whole issue of common sense, okay? Common sense in terms of interacting with students. And what this is basically telling us is that, how do you use common sense when you are interacting with students? The first thing you need to do is what we talked about. You maintain a professional barrier between you and the students. You let them know they have to refer to you in a respectful way. Mr., Miss, Doctor, if you hold a doctorate, okay? And also, if you're having a conference, usually with a student, it's only one student, if you happen to only have one student in that class, for that conference. And if the student is usually of the opposite sex, you want to leave your classroom door open, even if it is of the same sex. Because the student can allege anything. And it's just going to boil down to your word against that student. That's just the bottom line. So you do not want to put yourself in a situation where you do not have any defense. Okay? The whole issue of common sense is way in the back of your notebook. I think page 37 or so. You found it, what page is it?
37.
Okay, 37, page 37. Okay, also do not judge with students. Okay? Do not discuss your personal life with students. You are going through a divorce, it's none of their business for you to discuss that with them. Okay? They don't need to know about it. Transportation is an area that causes all kinds of commotion. Okay? Now, when a student has missed their school bus, there should be a school bus policy on what happens. Okay? Particularly if they have gone on a field trip and you come back around 7 p.m. in the evening and there are maybe 5 students, their parents are nowhere to be found. What do you do? There should be clearly a delineated school bus policy. Okay? And so that is what we are talking about right here. Okay? Also, what we're talking about is avoid leaving students alone. Because what happens is, if anything were to go wrong, that would be a major liability issue for the school district. Okay? Keep your hands and body to yourself. We have some educators, they're, touchy-feely type, and they don't mean anything by it, that's just their nature. But not everybody likes that to be touched, And so be very careful, okay? You need to know your school board policies, okay? Don't be calling students early. Your teacher that is calling you at home on, I will not recommend that. Now, it's a good thing, now, you're doing very well, you're trying to become a teacher, but when you're still in that K-12 system, I wouldn't recommend that a teacher does that. So what happens here is that could you get a test item? Because the documentation that the manual that I have provided for you, this we developed when I was in the Florida Department of Education. It's a Florida Department of Education documentation, okay? And so could you have a test item that basically asks you to list 5 items on the whole issue of common sense dealing with students. And so what you basically do is you go back, you just, 1, maintain a professional barrier, don't jive with students, keep your hands to yourself, don't leave students unavoided, you just identify 5 of these things, if they ask for 5. If they ask for 10, you identify 10 of these things. Okay, are you with me? Okay, very good. B is really talking about the whole issue of school board policies. Okay? That's what B is talking about. Okay? If you get to C, C is talking about your reputation in the community. Okay? And you look at parent 2. How do we communicate with parents? Basic human nature is that if a parent doesn't look good, they are not all dressed up, in tie, suit, Our basic human nature is to want to disrespect them. That's just the way we are made. And so basically what I'm saying here is that you need to be very careful, because even if you are rude to a parent, the Florida Department of Education probably won't, because of that reason, take away your certificate. But I tell you what, if that parent happened to be a politically connected parent in your local school district, they can create some serious problems for you. Remember again, your employment is under the school district. They can terminate your contract. So we need to be very careful how we deal with that. Number 3, dress appropriately, and act appropriately. Don't dress down. Even when the students see you that you are dressing apart, they'll even respect you more for it. Okay? Very good. Now, we're going to talk about the Adams case. Okay? As I said before, the Adams case has a lot of historical context for the ethical standards in the state of Florida. Okay? And so what are the facts of the case in the Adams case? Okay? This case actually happened around 1979. Okay? And so there were a couple of kids. In the case, they called them vandals. Okay? They were disturbing the peace of a subdivision. And one of the older people called law enforcement agency. And so the law enforcement agency came and saw this group of kids run behind a particular house. And the police pursued. When they got to the back of this specific house, they could barely they see a greenhouse, but they could barely see two people in the greenhouse. So the law enforcement agency, or the law enforcement officer, was going to go in and ask the people that he could barely see to ask them, where did the kids run to, you know. As soon as the law enforcement agency got into that greenhouse, they saw 52 plants of marijuana. Okay? And so the law enforcement agency immediately confiscated the 52 plants of marijuana. And then later, they found out that Mr. Adam and Mr. Ward, who were in the greenhouse, happened to be teachers of record in Lee County, right here. Okay? Fort Myers, right here. And so they eventually reported their case to the Florida Department of Education. The Florida Department of Education permanently revoked their certificate for two reasons. One, for immorality, and two, crimes involving moral turpitude. Crimes involving moral turpitude are usually dealing with crimes that are not part of the norms of a society. Usually we're dealing with drug issues, sex issues. So that's what we're talking about when you hear crimes involving moral turpitude. So we're charged for two things, immorality and moral turpitude. And so what happened in this case was that Mr. Adam and Mr. Ward argued that the fact that we are in possession of 52 plants of marijuana does not constitute immorality or crimes involving moral turpitude. And so some educators will say, oh yeah, So what they did in this case was that they appealed their case to the First District Court of Appeals, okay? And the judge in the First District Court of Appeals basically said that by virtue of their leadership capacity, teachers are traditionally held to a high moral standard in a community. So that is where that statement comes from, that educators in the state of Florida are held to a high moral standard. So is it very possible you could get a test item that could give you this quote and just basically ask you, identify where this quote is coming from. And you just basically say Adams versus State Professional Practices Council. Remember, it doesn't say Education Practices Commission, because the Education Practices Commission did not come into existence until 1980. Okay? And the case was already going on before then. Okay? Or they could ask you, they could also give you this quote and just say, identify the facts of the case. And so it's very important that you are aware of what is going on here. The other point that I want to emphasize is that the final orders of the Education Practices Commission is final. Okay? An educator couldn't go to the Commission of Education and say, Mr. Commissioner, I'm not happy with this. You are my body. Do something about it. The commissioner couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't go to the Commission of Education. The only recourse that educators have is to appeal the final orders of the Education Practices Commission to the First District Court of Appeals. And that is why Mr. Adam and Mr. Ward appealed their case to the First District Court of Appeals. So we're really talking about very serious stuff here. Okay? Very good. At this point, I am ready to give you your quiz.